Where do we find ourselves, really? Because we don't find ourselves in India or Peru.
In order to find ourselves, first we have to admit that we're lost, because it's very hard to find anything unless we've lost it first. Culturally, we are terrified of not knowing. We're terrified of not having an answer. And there's very, very little room in our lives for mystery. The more that I kind of try to find myself and try to figure out, and the more that I grasp, the more tension there is in my life. Maybe there's a far greater story unfolding for me that I can't even comprehend. I could never even imagine.
Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life, so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this.
Welcome back to another episode of Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers, and today I have a wonderful guest, a man who I've met in the flesh, which is wonderful. A man who is a coach to soul-led entrepreneurs and leaders and visionaries, guiding them to more purpose, more understanding, more depth, and realizing their purpose. A wonderful man called Meyer. I've got to meet him in person last year on a couple of occasions, actually, at John Wyland's intensives. He's a beautiful man, and we have a wonderful conversation, which really starts off talking about purpose and how we find purpose, and then kind of talking about the power of being lost. Why? Especially when you're trying to find purpose, especially when you're trying to find out who you are and delve into those things, why acknowledging your lostness and feeling your lostness is so important and how to do that. We talk a lot about that and why that's really important. We get into why taking responsibility for our lives is so vital. We dive into Vipassana and talking about our experiences of Vipassana, which is, for me, has been absolutely life-changing as well. We talk about how our life is a bit like an onion, or finding your purpose is a bit like an onion. It's not just something you find. We talk about the ills of the personal brand and why actually it's hurting you from finding yourself. And then this kind of link to the ego. And we talk about the kind of tension, the creative tension that we have in our lives between where we're trying to go and, who we think we are or who our ego thinks we are. This is one really beautiful episode, especially for those of you who are struggling with purpose and finding yourselves and so forth, because this is not like, we're not going to give you a step-by-step guide, but we will show you and teach you and talk to you about how to find out what's at a deeper level of who you are. If you're listening to this episode, I'll just let you know that I have a workshop coming up for avoidant men. Men are often struggling in relationships due to defensiveness, or struggling with emotions and struggling with feelings, struggling with, express themselves and expressing love and affection. If that's you, that's on the 13th of August at 7:30 p.m. UK time. You can find the details down in the show notes as well, if that's of interest to you. But without further ado, I'll let you jump into the episode. Welcome, listeners. I've got a wonderful man with me today, a man who I've, in this world that we live in now, it's very rare you actually meet people in person. Like you can have whole knowings of people through online or through that weird vicarious way in which you can kind of follow someone for ages but never really know who they are. But today's guest is a man I've had the wonderful pleasure of experiencing his presence. A wonderful man who's grounded, he's loving, he's open-hearted, and very, very fucking funny as well. Evan, lovely to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, man. Just as you're sharing that, I was thinking of, I think the very first time we actually sat down in front of each other was we ate dinner together in Panamint Valley out in the desert with John Wyland. And Yeah, man. I just remember just having a lot of laughs. I don't remember what our conversation was, but we just laughed a lot. So it's good to be here with you, man. It's good to catch up.
Yeah, man. It was that valley, that desert in the middle of nowhere. It was baking in the day and freezing at night. And these pictures often pop up on, your iPhone. It pops up and says memories and stuff. And it's just like these memories of these ice baths in the middle of the desert. And every so often I'll show someone, I'm like, yeah, I was on this retreat and there was ice baths in the middle of the desert. And they're like, how did they freeze the water? And I was like, actually, people went off every day on a 2.5, 3 hour round trip to get ice for these ice baths.
Devotion. That's what I would call that, right? Devotion to the cause.
And the ice baths were wonderful because it was like having a bath, having our daily little wash. But not quite.
You just didn't want to be the last guy in there out of 60 of them. You know what I mean? That day. Everyone else is sweat and grime, cold sweat and grime. It's like a nightmare, man.
Yeah. Where do I like to start? I think it's always really nice to start to find out people's journeys, like what led them to the beautiful work that you do with men and groups of men and coaching men. What was your journey to where you got to now, or to the work you do now? Yeah,
it's a great question. I'll try to keep it succinct, but share some more important details. So I was, to put my childhood and kind of teenage years pretty succinctly, I was just wild, disobedient, just what didn't fit into the system, like from when I was really young, and regular education, all the typical kind of domestic life just didn't vibe with me. And so, like many young men do, I turned to drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff to get my kicks in my late teens. And long story short, I enjoyed those things a little bit too much, got myself into a lot of trouble legally, and then really psychologically, honestly, kind of had a nervous breakdown when I was around 17 or 18 and was riddled with some pretty severe anxiety that I had never experienced in my life, and was kind of given the traditional route of taking medications and antidepressants and all this kind of whole litany of sleeping pills and all that kind of crap, which when you give to someone that likes to take drugs is just not a good idea either. And so kind of knew that wasn't the path for me, but was still left with, okay, well, what do I do with all this anxiety that I'm feeling? And so I started to turn to something alternative. And this was pretty early on, like 2005, 2006, when there wasn't e-courses and PDFs and all that kind of crap that you could download. And so I actually ended up ordering this disc set, this like box CD set from an English guy. I think his name was Charles Linden. It was called the Linden Method, and it was to get rid of general anxiety. And it had meditations and diet recommendations and all these book and audio meditations you'd listen to. And so I followed that, and I started to see some results, and I was like, oh, wow, this can work. Like I can use my own mind and my own body and the way I eat and the way I treat myself and all this kind of stuff to enact like psychological change. And so that got me curious. And then, and so I still I lived in two worlds. I had one foot in the world of, I went to college, I got a business degree, I partied, I did all that kind of stuff that kids do when they're in university. And then also I was on the side, like going to the Tibetan monastery and meditating for 2 or 3 days at a time, and kind of lived both feet in separate worlds, into like biohacking and all this kind of stuff, and very early days of that. And then also trying to fit in and be a normal 20-something-year-old, not too weird and fringe, because I was still hanging out with normies or whatever, people that weren't really into that world. And then so was working in all sorts of different jobs, worked in the rigs for a few years, made a bunch of money, got laid off. That's the Canadian oil rigs. I'm from Canada originally. And then went traveling for 1.5 years. And while I was traveling, that's when I really started to open. I was about 25, 26 at this time. Really started to open my mind to like, I started to meet my people, essentially, like people that were into all the weird stuff that I was in that I kept hidden from everyone else. Ended up in South America by chance, was studying Spanish, came across ayahuasca. That was a pretty big shift in my life. Did a 9-day retreat there, did a yoga teacher training. I had been practicing yoga as another way to kind of alleviate my anxiety and stuff like that. And so that's when I really started to shift to more seriously taking like a holistic health kind of path. And that's where things really started for me, is like diet and health and yoga and things like that. In my mid-20s, came back to Canada, did a couple of these Vipassana meditation retreats, these 10-day silent meditation retreats under the SN Goenka lineage. For people listening might be familiar with that. Really rigorous, 12 hours a day, no talking, no eye contact, nothing. Like basically it's like a prison of meditation. So I did about, over the course of the years, about 6 or 7 of those from when I was 25 to 30. And then I came across John's work at some point in that. John Wineland, read David. So what happened was I read David Data's Way, The Superior Man. Everything just clicked. I read the book in like 2 days. Very common story for a lot of men. Like, I had always had relational problems. Always felt like I had mates in my life. I had good boys in my life, but I never had like true brotherhood, right? Like guys that really got me for who I was and that I could fully be myself around. And so that book told me to join a men's group. That was back in late 2016, 2017, joined a men's group. Those guys had just finished John's program, his first year of EMLT, his first year of the Embodiment Leadership Training Program. And so I was like, it was just a local little men's group that ran once a month. And they were doing all these embodiment things. And I was like, where did you guys learn all this stuff? And they're like, oh, this guy, John. And so first chance I got, I flew down to California, went to a public retreat that he was hosting. And when I walked in, I knew, by the end of that weekend, basically, I knew that this is whatever. I didn't know I was going to be teaching or leading, but I knew that I needed to pursue his work and this work, like to as far as it possibly could. And so, 2017, 2017, 2018, I'm always a little hazy on exactly when it was, but basically from then on, from 2018 up until last year, I studied with John intensely, did 24 retreats with him, was part of his men's program for, 4 or 5 years, did his teacher training, assisted at the women's retreats, everything I possibly could. I just ate that work up. And then along the way, I was farming at the time. I thought I was going to be an organic farmer for the rest of my life because I'm really passionate about food and farming and, kind of stewarding the earth. And I would talk about what I was up to with John, and people would ask me questions. And then at one point, this couple from another farm said, hey, do you want to teach a workshop on our farm? Like, we've got this space, we do like workshops in, we'll organize everything. And so I said, sure, why not? I'll teach a 1-day workshop. And so that was 2020, and taught 16 guys in this space and made more money doing that than I did in like weeks of farming, and felt so alive, like just beyond the money, just felt like, oh, I could do this. And the guy that organized it said, oh, you've done this like 15, 20 times. I said, I've never taught a workshop in my life. And so that was a pretty big confirmation. And then after the farming season ended, I just went full bore into men's work. And along the way, I hired many other teachers. I spent 2 years studying something called ontological coaching with a couple named Adam and Bate Quiney, which is learning how to coach people in their way of being, kind of like the deepest essence of who they are. And numerous other trainings and all this kind of stuff I got really into. And that leads us to kind of today, where for the last 4 years, I've been developing my own leadership, learning how to lead powerfully, and then teaching workshops, online programs for men. And then, of course, I started a company with 3 guys that I met through John's world in EMLT, Nick, Alan, and Chris. And we have 13 Pines, which is an organization that runs retreats and programs for men as well. Online and in person. Just ran a beautiful retreat a couple months ago for about 45 men in Austin, Texas, which was amazing. And my work's continuing to evolve. It's opening beyond just working with men. It's becoming a lot more nature based now. I'm another kind of, I'm like a weirdo I have my hands in a million different fires, man, or whatever they say. And so primitive skills, wilderness survival stuff is a big part of what I do as well. And I really want to start to merge those worlds together, where I bring people into kind of these backcountry, primitive situations and teach them how to really be on the land and how to live off the land, and then also do kind of more of the deep transformational work out there. So yeah, that's kind of, if I could succinctly put it in 4 or 5 minutes, that's been the journey, and I'm happy to dive into any components or parts of that. But yeah, man, I never, this all came very organically. I never thought I'd be doing this work. It was really by the invitations that I just continued to say yes to.
Wow. What a beautiful journey. Because It's like that starting point, those CDs, those CDs you ordered. It's like there was a what you might have described at times a problem, something you wanted to solve. And I guess the question that came to me actually when you were saying that was that one of the first moments in your life where you kind of realized that you could change how you are being, how your mind works, how you thought about yourself and your life?
Yeah, man. I mean, I was, especially me, I err on the side of skepticism. Like if you knew me when I was much younger than I am, even a decade ago, 15 years ago, like I was just a skeptic by nature and a nihilist, honestly, just like who gives a fuck? Like that was my attitude. That's why I was just down to, I dropped out of high school. I just wanted to just have enough money so I could party and go do whatever I want. And like, I didn't give a shit. I didn't give a shit about anybody else. I didn't give a shit about myself. And the idea that I could take responsibility for my life or my emotions or my psychological state and shift it was so foreign to me. And yet I think all of that way of being in the world was just really a response to being in pain. And underneath that, I was, much more sensitive than I alluded to. And there was a part of me, obviously, that did want to change and that did want to have a better outlook on life. And I think that's what inspired me to go on the path of taking responsibility versus what a lot of young people are invited to do or are kind of coerced to do, and a lot of, not even just young people, but most people, just to like rely on, you can't change. You have something wrong with you. Here's a pill, powder, potion. You're going to be on this for the rest of your life, which is a sad state of affairs. And I'm super grateful that whatever that impetus was when I was that age, 17, 18, whatever that wisdom was that I had, or whether it was me or something beyond me that said, this is not the path. Like there's another way. Grateful for that, because I wouldn't be doing what I do today if it wasn't for that.
Yeah. It really took responsibility for the direction of life, And the reason why that point really leaped out to me, because I've always feel like in my own life there was a turning point. I was about 21, and I was at uni, what you call college, and my life was kind of blowing up. I was like losing friends because I found out that my girlfriend was sleeping with my housemate and all sorts of bad shit. And a friend of mine gave me a book called Conversations with God. And I remember she gave me this book, and we're still friends. And I was like, what the fuck are you giving me this book for? I don't fuck with this church shit, right? I grew up in the church. I wasn't really interested. And she was like, David, it's not what you think it is. She was like, just trust me, read the book. She gave me that book, and I read it in 3 days. She gave it to me on a Friday, and I finished the whole thing by, I think it was Sunday evening. And the message I got from that book was like, you can choose how your life goes, and you can change the obvious path of your life if you choose to. And I remember taking that away, and it completely altered the path of my life. Like, similar to yourself, I'm reading all these books around philosophy, and I'm going to Tibetan monasteries and staying there for a couple of days. And I'm telling my friends, and my friends are like, yeah, you're just into some weird shit, Dave. That's just what you do. Like, cool. They're accepting, but not really interested.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of standard male response to a lot. Like, is this, like you said, this skepticism that anything outside of the root or the kind of what we're shown can be useful to us.
Yeah, the cultural narrative, right? Like just the way that it is for 99% of people. Anything that diverges out of that is judged, is met with skepticism, right? It's just, yeah. And at that age, it's hard to individuate. Like it's hard to just step out and be like, well, whatever, fuck it. Who cares what they think? That's the opposite. And you have to go through that phase of your life of learning how to be socially like acceptable and like get along with society. I think it's an important stage of our development. It's really hard to just stand out on your own from a young age because it's not safe for people, right? You can't. It's hard to stand outside the culture, and for most of humanity's existence, if you were too divergent from your tribe or your society and you stood on the outside of it, you wouldn't survive, right? And so we still have that baked into our biology. We have to fit in, we have to be accepted. And so it sounds like you had a similar experience where you kind of had a foot in both worlds.
Yeah. I could be partying in a rave until 6 a.m. on a Friday, and then be packing my bags on a Monday morning to go off for a week and stay in a monastery in the UK somewhere, or drive up there and or I went and did Vipassana. I can't remember the first one. It must have been 8 or 9 years ago now. And just mentioning to people, they were like, "You're fucking crazy. Why are you going to go and sit and meditate for 12 hours a day? That's going to be horrible. I can't think of anything worse." I was like, "No, I think there's something in this. I think this could really be like a great thing to do." But a lot of the guys I knew were just like, "Dude, why don't you just like go to Ibiza for the weekend, or why don't you just go and party?" And I find it you talked about individuation, right? There's this, and you talked to kind of paradox, isn't it? Is that we have to both get into society and learn how to kind of function in society to be safe and so forth. But there's also a need for us to rebel against, I believe, what I see with my clients a lot is like this, we all need to rebel against our parents' rule and the rule of society to some degree. Or we end up just living a life that isn't ours, a life that's sensible, or we followed all the rules. And many people still do that. Many men especially, I find, do that until their 30s and into their 40s, and then have what commonly we call midlife crisis, which I like to call midlife awakening, because when the man comes to me and he's middle of that, it's a really prime time for transformation.
100%, I agree. Yeah, and the distinction I would make there is like, we could also get, it's always so much nuance in these, but if we're just rebelling for the sake of rebelling, oftentimes that's a response, right? And so there's an important distinction. And it sounds like you and I are more aligned in that when we were very young, we kind of knew like, okay, we can play this game, but this isn't what's all there. This isn't it, right? Like for me, like Vipassana eventually became like going on a vacation for me. It was like going to Ibiza or something like that, man. I was happy to be there. Good. I don't have to talk to anyone. All my meals are prepared for me. I can just stare at the ground all day, navel gaze, like perfect. This is what I want, because I'm a bit of an introvert in that way. And I really like my spaciousness and silence. And so for me, that was heaven. But to get to that place, to your point, like, yeah, we have to learn how to play the game, and we have to individuate at some point. But the problem is that we can, I believe that we need to individuate in order to come back into society and give whatever our unique gifts are. So it's not about rebelling against society forever, because that's just as adolescent as doing whatever you're told, like being a really good boy or a nice guy, something like that, like doing whatever they tell you to do. Your parents said you have to be an engineer or a doctor, or you have to do this, or you have to go to school, or you have to make sure that like you pay all your fucking parking tickets on time and everything like that. Like there's a lot of people like that are like, oh God, right? And then the opposite would just be someone that just says like, fuck everything. Like this is, and I was more on that end. But they're equally adolescent. So there's some piece around that where it's like, cool, yeah, this is how society is structured. I can step out of it. I can individuate. I can find really who I am. But hopefully in service of coming back into society and serving others. I think that's what the world really needs. Because you could go up and stay in that monastery up, in the northern UK or wherever you ended up, and just stay there for the rest of your life. And that's a really easy life. And that's important work for some people to do, but it can also be a cop-out. It's a type of rebellion as well, where you never have to really learn how to integrate and be in society as an individual, which I think is the hardest line to walk. To be fully free and individuated and expressed in yourself while being completely immersed in life.
Because it's the complexities of the world, isn't it? It's easy to, many a teacher says it's easy to go and be enlightened when you're in a cave and you don't have to talk to anyone for 2 or 3 years. But like, wait till you have to come back and, I don't know, man, cross a road and go to a supermarket and pay your bills. Suddenly
raise a child. You know what I mean?
Raise a
like
child.
All the stuff you're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You suddenly get, man, I tell you, you could feel real present and real calm and patient, but you wait until that child poos on your brand new Adidas tracksuit, and you're really put to test. all the work is put to test in that moment. Do you feel resentful? But yeah, it's like it's easy to go and be in the meditation retreat and be in Vipassana and sit in the lovely room, or if you're really into it, you go and get your own little cell and sit in there. But to bring that level of presence and awareness back into the world, that's the real test. That's the real work, because we live in a world that's intense when it comes to its stimulus and opinions and polarizations.
Extremely.
And probably more intense than it's ever been in history.
100%.
So I
mean, look
so I
at the
guess
US right now. It's nuts.
wow. You guys is like living in
Crazy.
Simpsons episode.
It's bad, man. I always like to tell people, like, fuck, I'm from Canada, man. I just live here. Like, I'm not part of this. I can't vote, so thank goodness. God, I wouldn't want to.
Just on a long vacation. But I guess the thing is, you talked about finding yourself, right? And this is something that a lot of people talk about. Like, I want to find myself. You know, a lot of people backpack off to India. You know, they go to the mountains of Peru. Where do we find ourselves, really? Because we don't find ourselves really in India or Peru or Australia, wherever we find ourselves. How do we start to find ourselves?
Yeah, this is something I'm in the process of experiencing myself, even as someone who's built some pretty cool things that I'm like, from the outside, externally, people could say, wow, you're really, you've really got it figured out. You're on purpose. You're creating these beautiful things in the world. You've built businesses. I've done all the things. I've traveled through the mountains of Peru, and I've traveled through the jungles and all over the world and in search of things. And there's a few things that I've been thinking about. One of them is that we have a huge aversion societally to just allowing ourselves to be lost, like allowing ourselves to be in liminal kind of spaces where we're not really sure what to do with our lives. And we often feel and are kind of pressured into figuring it out. Like if I were to approach my parents, let's say maybe when I was a little younger, or my friends, and I was like, yeah, I'm just completely fucking lost. They would almost immediately want to provide a solution. They might have a podcast that I should listen to, or a book that I should read, or do my ikigai thing where it's like the intersection of all the things you are passionate about and are good at and all that kind of stuff. Or maybe they would be like, well, you need to see a therapist. Maybe it's trauma. Or there's always a solution, because we have this reductionist, solution-oriented society that we live in, where we have to figure out everything all the time. We have to break everything down to its components and learn how it works and all this kind of stuff. And there's very, very little room in our lives for mystery. There's very, very little room in modern society for the unknown, because my understanding, or how I observe things to be, is that culturally, like, we are terrified of not knowing. We're terrified of not having an answer to things. And that is a very new, it's kind of like we apply this scientific method, this reductionist attitude, to everything. And that's a pretty new way of looking at the world. And what I've been really sitting with is like, okay, how do we find ourselves? Well, in order to find ourselves, first we have to admit that we're lost, right? Because it's very hard to find anything unless we've lost it first. And so, okay, I'm lost. Now, what do I do with my lostness, right? And this is my opinion of how we really find something that's beyond, because it's very easy to go find something and grasp that and be like, that's my purpose, or this is me, or this is what I'm here for. Or I went to India and I met a guru and now I'm like, this is my purpose now. Or I drank some ayahuasca and this is my purpose now. Or I watched this incredible YouTube thing about a guy that does this and now I want to do what he's doing. It's like very, very, we're always trying to grasp onto something because we want that security, rather than just saying, okay, I'm lost. Like maybe just announcing to the world, show me. Like whatever it is, if it's God or whatever you want to call it, the universe, it doesn't matter, but just actually allowing yourself to surrender to find yourself. And maybe it's not about you, right? Maybe you just make yourself an open vessel to receiving what life wants to give you. Because my understanding and what I'm beginning to learn is that the more that I kind of try to find myself and try to figure out, and the more that I grasp, the more tension there is in my life. And it's also just so conceited to think that like my own individual knowledge and desire to figure out is like more intelligent than what the universe has in store for me. Or I'm more wise than like something that maybe there's a far greater story unfolding for me that like I can't even comprehend. I could never even imagine. And I think anyone listening or watching this, listening to or watching this can resonate with a moment in their life or a period of their life where they kind of had to surrender control, or they didn't know what was happening. And the ways that things worked out and the ways that things fell into place was far more magnificent and unusual and surprising and delightful than they could have ever conjured up in their own planning, in their own schedule, in their own mind, in their own ikigai, in their own whatever 10-step program or seminar or landmark, or all the stuff that I've all done and I had to go through, only get this place in my life where I realized, like, no, it's actually, in my opinion, in the surrender. And I think that people's inclination to wander, right? Like to wander, to find themselves, to wander to foreign places, to wander in the internal landscapes of their mind through Vipassana is a very normal and is maybe the right thing to do. Because what do you do when you're feeling lost? You wander. You wander to find your way, right? You would never, if you're lost physically, if you're lost in the forest, you wouldn't sit down and make a list. You wouldn't write about how you're lost. You wouldn't make pros and cons, like this is what's good about being lost, this is bad. No, you would just start moving in a direction. Maybe you try to find a river, and then follow the river. That'll generally take you down to civilization, or you'll try to find your way out of it just by wandering, but not necessarily, you don't have a destination because you don't know where you are. And so to find ourselves, I think it's the same. It's like, okay, I don't know who I am. I'm going to allow myself to just try things. I'm going to take the pressure off of needing to figure it out and to have a timeline of when it's supposed to happen, or that it has to make me this much money, or that I have to meet the love of my life in this, or that I have to find the perfect job or whatever it is, and just relax, right? And just allow yourself to follow the impulses of where's life guiding you? Like what is pulling at the threads? Because when we open our awareness up to the signs that life is constantly giving us all over the place, right? And we begin to follow those muses without needing it to go a certain way. Oftentimes people end up stumbling into things that are beyond anything they could comprehend, that feel like they're tugging at the right path. And I also think, I'll just add one more piece, is I think that you go through seasons of life. I think somebody that is truly committed to the evolution of their own being and consciousness will always have seasons of their life where they're back into like a lost kind of stage, or like, who am I? Because it's like peeling this onion. That's such a common, phrase that people use, but it really is. It's like, it's not like you don't know what to do with your life, or you don't know who you are. Like, who am I? How do I find myself? And then you find yourself, and then you're 30, and then when you're 30 until you're 99, you know who you are, and life's figured out. Like, it's pretty unusual. I suppose you do have people like that in cultural, maybe artists or something like that, or someone that, finds very young some passion that they're about. But I would say even for them, it's like this iterative process of us unwinding all our social conditioning and deepening into who we are at our essence, which is like the enjoyment of it. I would never want to find myself from this begrudged, like, this is an awful thing, I need to find myself. It's like, wow, this is a mystery. I'm a mystery. Life's a mystery. Let's dive in and see how life wants to evolve through me, and following the signs of the signals and letting it be an adventure of self-discovery. And as you deepen in that self-discovery, what I've understood in myself is that life begins to make bigger invitations for you. And then I believe everybody's here to serve gifts and serve others in some way. It could be very minor, or it could be really big. It doesn't have to be on a big public stage. It could be something that you do just in your local community, whatever it is. But as you continue to find yourself, quote unquote, you become a bit of a way shower for others. And it could be in really small ways, right? To just help them kind of unravel and step on their own path of self-discovery. So I know that was a huge, long kind of answer, and I'm sure there's a lot of directions we can go from there, but yeah.
It's like an unfolding instead of the kind of linear thing of like, okay, I'm going to join a program, and it's going to tell me what my purpose is, and I'm going to fill out these worksheets, and I'm going to go, just going to crunch through some computer system. It's going to say, this is your purpose, or these are the 15 things that could be your purpose.
The algorithm, like ChatGPT told me my purpose, right?
Actually, it's like to wander both. I kind of hearing what you're saying is like to wander both through the mind both in reality as well. And in reality, that can take up many different ways in which, I had this sense of, and you didn't say it, it's like saying yes to things because it feels like something that could be interesting and curious to you, or traveling to a place just for the curiosity and to see where the threads of your life, or where I like to say almost like a tension, where the tension leans you towards, it's like if you're standing on the spot, sometimes we just lean to one side and we don't quite know why we lean to one side, or we feel one part of our body feels drawn to pick up an object in the room. It's like almost following that, but in like a grander scale in our life. And allowing ourselves the subtle nudges and whispers. I call them like these subtle whispers that you hear. Like, go and...
Exactly.
I was speaking to my sister yesterday. She's my big sister, and her and one of my younger sister, they went glass blowing. And I was like, why did you go glass blowing? And she just said to me, she just followed it. She just saw something that sounded interesting. And I think that is like kind of hearing what you're saying there about finding ourselves or finding purpose is to a level of just being present to what is and allowing what our impulse, what we feel drawn to, what we're curious about to lead us, whether that's, we can go deeper into our mind, but it's less about this very kind of intentional, goal-orientated, direction-orientated, and more of a kind of a spacious unfolding.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And like, isn't that, I don't know, that's how I would want my life to go. Why would I want to feel the tension and the stress around figuring out what I'm supposed to be doing here? That what am I going to find or create from that place? Right? Versus the idea that perhaps I could just surrender to the mystery, the muse of what's going to pull me into something far more, not only far more interesting, but actually much more unique, right? Mm-hmm. Like generally it's not, whatever you could discover in that journey is not going to be something that you could put in a LinkedIn profile, right? Like this unique gift that you have to give the world is a lot deeper than our vocation or what we could maybe tell somebody about in an elevator pitch, because the world, like we have our own mythos, we have our own story that we're living in our lives, and that's wanting to live through us, and that's constantly making an invitation for us to deepen into if we choose to. And all the stuff, the worksheets and the seminars and the programs, all that's important. I'm not discrediting any of that because it's part of that pulling on that thread, but it's not the answer. The answer isn't in there. The answer, some guy at the front of a room doesn't have the answer for what I'm supposed to do with my life. It's super unfortunate. People don't want to hear that. That's why people invest so much money in this idea of finding something to do with their life, because they say, oh, well, this person must know. They have the expertise. They might have the expertise on where to point people. Maybe they might just have a really good marketing team. But generally another person doesn't know what the hell I'm supposed to do with my life. And I'll give you a personal example. I'm packing up my place here, and I'm going to hit the road for, basically my lease was up. I wanted to go month to month because I didn't want to stay at this place, but they wanted to like increase the rent by an absurd amount to go month to month. So I was like, you know what? No, I don't have a place lined up. I'm not going to move. I'm not going to stay here for another year. So I started putting my stuff in storage, and I'm just going to go get in my car, and I'm just going to drive west, and I'm just going to see what happens. And I have a few things planned along the way. I'm doing a trip in late September, but I have massive amounts of time in between kind of these different commitments that I've made to just explore it. I literally have no plans. And I'll be working a little bit, of course, but for the most part, I'm just allowing myself to be pulled by wherever life wants to take me. And that, like, to me, that brings a lot of thrill. It brings some excitement of the unknown. Like, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I don't even know if I'm going to return here. Like, I just really don't know what's next for me. And what I do know, what I'm certain of, is that whatever transpires on this trip, for however long it ends up being, that it will be pulling me in the direction that my life is meant to go. And so there's no way that I could do it wrong. There's no way that I can fail at it. There's no way that like I could take the wrong detour or go to the wrong town or see the wrong person or not do it right or not get enough out of it or whatever, all these kind of ideas that we might have about how our life is supposed to go, because I'm fully in the surrender of allowing life to pull me into what's next, right? And who knows what will transpire. But I know that every other time that I've ever done something like this, it's been nothing but beneficial for my life, right? And so we are so... There's a piece around, like, we kind of want to live this big... I mean, I can speak for myself, but a lot of the men that I talk to, they want to live this big, adventurous, epic life. Like, they really, really desire that. And they want it to be like safe and secure and trustable and knowable the whole time. And like not involve any fear and like know exactly what's going to happen and know where the money's going to come from. And they know where, you know what I mean? And they want it all figured out and they don't want to have to give up like their fucking vape or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like they don't want to give anything up and they don't want any risk. And they also want the adventure and the epic life. It's like, that's not going to happen. That's not how life works, right? Possibility and fear always come in equal amounts. So if we want the possibility of living an absolutely extraordinary life, there's going to be just as much fear that comes with that because that's the nature of the game we're playing. That's why most people don't do it. Most people would rather suffer miserably in the safety and security of what's familiar than take the risk of stepping into the unknown and potentially have an extraordinary life. That's how scary it is for people. I don't condemn those people at all. I get it. It's fucking terrifying. Like becoming an entrepreneur, living the life that I do, moving countries, like all the kind of stuff that I've done. And it sounds like you've done too, man. It's not an easy life. It's terrifying. You're living and, you know, you're moving around, jumping around. You're responsible for a little one. You've got all this like constant taking on your own work. People should be really careful what they wish for. Oh, you really want to live a deep life. You really want to live a life of purpose. You really want to live a life that's like extraordinary and you're in control of, you know, well, not really in control, but you have the freedom to do whatever you want. Good luck. Because it's really, really challenging. Running your own business, super challenging, right? All this kind of stuff. It's not for the faint of heart. And it requires some really deep honesty with yourself. And it requires what I'm learning is I have to surrender deeper and deeper and deeper in order for life to feel the way that I desire it to feel, which is kind of sounds like a paradox. But it's the more that I try to shape life into how I want it to be, the more it doesn't work out for me.
It's enjoying the life as it is and taking the juice from it instead of attempting to massage it and force it to look the way you think it needs to look for you to feel the way you think you want to feel.
Yeah, and even if you're not enjoying life, just being with the unenjoyment of it too. Right? Like just your capacity to be with it however it is, because it's the tension of it wanting to be a different way, that's where the pain is and that's where the rub is.
And it is this interesting thing I see, this desire. Like you said, I see people want to live these epic, amazing lives, being mad entrepreneurs, doing amazing things. But then there's this deep desire for security and safety. And those two things, like, that's a huge tension to hold within you, which I think is a reason why so many people suffer from so many kind of what I say kind of mental disorders, because there's this huge tension. There's what they desire and what they kind of deeply conditioned to, what they fear, and they don't notice that they are completely pulling apart from each other constantly within their minds.
Mm-hmm. And for a lot of people, and what I've had to learn is that how can I be resourced and create safety within, even in the most, what feels like unsafe situations in my life. And I don't mean beyond just being physically unsafe. Obviously that's a situation that, you know, anybody's going to have fear around. But I mean in the tension of like, I don't know where my next paycheck's coming from. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. I don't know where, like whatever it is, I don't know how I'm going to make this work, man. I'm in over my head and like, okay, how do I resource myself and know that from my evolved consciousness that like I'm actually safe right now? Because we could go down a whole tangential road about this, but most of the safety and security stuff, yes, it's very primal and we need it. And a lot of it just transpires from like our childhood, right? Just like most things, right? Because everybody has a different level of risk and risk aversion and what feels safe and what doesn't in terms of what they need to feel secure in their lives. And most of that stuff was programmed into us based on where we were raised and the culture we were raised in and all this kind of stuff and, you know, what our parents' relationship to safety and all that kind of stuff was. And so a lot of this work of like really living a life where you're fully in surrender to like the mystery, which requires a lot of letting go, is doing a lot of that inner healing of what is safety and what is security and how can I feel safe in any moment? And is it okay if I I don't know how I'm going to make things work, or if I'm on my last few dollars or whatever it might be for people. Can I resource myself even in this situation? Can I hold myself even in that and know that it's going to be okay? And that is the surrender. Like, that's the trust that, like, oh, well, life will carry me and take care of me. And I don't mean that in some woo-woo way. I mean that quite literally, that it might take care of you, which means like the utter destruction of your life. Like, I'm not saying it'll take care of you and you'll get it all of a sudden, thousands of dollars will show up in your bank account, or you'll land that client or whatever, or you'll just make rent in time, or whatever it is, whatever people are struggling with, or you'll know exactly what to do next, or you'll find your purpose. What I'm saying is you trust it enough even to descend into the darkness of life, to even have to deal with, like, holy shit, this is the hardest thing I've ever dealt with, or things do collapse, or your business falls apart, or your relationship falls apart, or whatever it is that you have to, whatever transpires in your life, that this too is working for me. This too is part of the path to discovering who I am, right? So I want to make it really abundantly clear that I am not speaking in bypassing superficialities about life being easy, and if you just trust the universe, it'll take care of you and you'll manifest everything you ever want. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that you trust life regardless of where it takes you. Because what other option do you really have? Whether you want things to go really well or you want things to avoid going really, really badly in any situation, all it does is create tension. All it does is take you away from what is, which is what you're speaking to, being present, but being present with all of it. This takes a huge capacity. Right? It takes a huge amount of just being like, fuck it, I'm just here for it.
Yeah. Yeah. You said there's a bigger plan. We don't know. We might think that right now what I need is another $10,000 to pay my rent and feel safe for the rest of the year, right? And in my small perspective of my life right now, I can only see how I'm feeling right now, what I need to do next. I can't see the big, long story of my whole life, or the story of my lineage's life, right? So I think that I know what I need and what needs to happen for me to feel safe and for me to feel good. But if I had the access to the larger story of my existence and my family existence, the very thing I need is to be evicted from my flat, right? That's going to force me to then, like, learn a new way of making money, or speak to this random guy I meet in a coffee shop one day who I tell I've just been evicted and whatever. And that is the thing that sets me onto my purpose, or sets me in play to do the things that, I really need to do. It's like, I often say to people, one of the best things that ever happened to me was there was a girl that I was working with, and she absolutely broke my heart. Absolutely broke my heart. I came across some writing that I did during that time recently. And it's me just saying how shit my life feels and how shit going to work is and so forth. At that time, it was horrible. We worked in the same office. I saw her a few days a week, but I didn't know what days a week she was going to be in the office, because she worked kind of like strange hours and randomly where she wanted to. So I didn't even have the safety of knowing, okay, it's Monday, she's going to be there, prepare myself. And it was horrible. But when I look at it now, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it released me from a deep fear of loving someone and not being loved back, right? And that would hold me back in love and relationships my whole life, or since I was 16, definitely. But it released me from that fear and allowed me to love deeply and find the wonderful relationship I'm in now. But that moment when I was in it, I didn't know that this was going to be one of the best things that ever happened to me, because all I can think about is what the little me needs and wants in this moment, which is to feel better. I don't see the larger story of my life.
Yeah, well, we don't learn a lot when things go well. When things work out for us, we don't really learn that much. We just don't. We learn it when it's a catastrophe. We learn it's like, oh shit, I got evicted from my place, or like I had this disastrous relationship with someone that I have to see every day and have my heart broken or whatever. Like, we learn from that. Oh, maybe I'm gonna approach the relationships differently with coworkers, or maybe I'm gonna approach the way that I hold finances, or getting in over my head, or learning that maybe I don't need a whole lot in terms of like where I live in order to be comfortable. Right. And so it's all grist for the mill, man. Like, I'm pretty into jiu-jitsu right now. And like, I'm new, but when I get matched up with a guy that's newer than me, I don't learn anything. I just and I just fuck him up. Like, and it's easy and it's fun and it feels good. And it's like, cool, I win. Right. But I have to put myself into compromising positions with those people in order to practice But if I'm against someone that is much, much higher ranked than me, which is most of the time, I just get smashed. And I learn because I don't want to get smashed anymore. All right. So it's such a great metaphor for life, and maybe it's a little overused, but it's this idea that like, yeah. And that's the thing. It's just trusting. It's not, I would even be weary of like trusting that, oh, I got evicted, so now I met this guy and now my life explodes. But just like not even going that far into the narrative, but just trusting like, okay, cool. What does life have in store for me now that I'm out on the street with nowhere to live? And I know this is like, for some people listening, they're gonna be like, fuck that. Like it sounds so counterintuitive because like, of course no one wants to be pushed to homelessness and all this kind of things or whatever happens in your life that you can be like, even this, like even, a sibling committing suicide or even something tragic, my parents dying in a car wreck or losing my child or whatever like that. Like even this has something. It's not just some random act of terrible whatever, something that's just completely tragic with no meaning. And I would say, yes, even that is winding and weaving into the mythos of your life, into what you're here to do in some way that may not make sense to us. And we shouldn't try to explain, but rather just feel and accept and allow. And then, like you said, sometimes it takes many years in reflection to look back like, oh, that is why that happened that way. Like I can think of dozens of moments in my life where I was like, oh man, that was like literally one of the worst moments of my life, and I'm so grateful for it, right? And I feel like because I know that, as I can reflect on that and I have that ascertained that small amount of wisdom, now preemptively I know like if I'm in a difficult situation, I'm like, okay, this is happening and it sucks, and I can feel all the emotions around it and be angry about it and upset, and it's not to bypass anything and to go through the experience of the tension of being alive, which is just a hard thing to do. It's hard to be here. Like life is hard. And it is in service of something beyond me. And I can hold both. Like this is in service of something that I don't even understand yet. And it's fucking miserable and I don't want it to happen. And we all have the obligation to do the survival dance, which is learning how to make money and be safe and all that kind of stuff. We can't really deepen into life if we don't know how to do that, because we're going to be too much in the survival mode all the time, and that's not a place that most people can really thrive or live from. It's very hard to like open yourself to surrender when you're like starving, right? Or whatever it is. So there's always nuance in this conversation, and it's really important. I'm noticing more and more as I mature and I have more conversations with people, my desire to bring more nuance into every conversation, that it's not so cut and dry, right? And that like, yes, of course we need to take care of our needs and all that kind of stuff, and we have to also be willing to surrender into the unknown simultaneously. And if those feel like they're in conflict, good, welcome to life.
Yeah, and the nuances are important because as things have evolved in our society, it's like everything feels very binary and very polarized. It's like
so binary.
If I say a fact and it sells and creates hype and people get angry about it, but if you bring nuance and sensibility, people just kind of scroll past your shit. They're like, this is boring. This guy's talking sensible stuff and saying like, love everybody, be kind, be decent. But when someone's an arsehole to you, I'm not triggered. I'm scrolling past.
Boring. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I was going to say, what it also kind of dawned on me as you were saying there is our difficulty with feeling where we are. And I'd love to get your take on this. The reason why we want to like find that solution, go to the program, get ChatGPT to tell us what it is, the answer is because of the uncomfortability with feeling, both being lost or being unsure of our purpose or not sure where we're going, but just our general uncomfortability with feeling anything that doesn't feel good in the moment, and escaping from that into thinking and then basically distracting ourselves from it in the hope that we can bypass the feeling by thinking ourselves into something and getting rid of the feeling without actually feeling it.
100%. Yeah. And like, man, I know I'm the most guilty of this. It's part of being someone that, like, on one hand, I can think deeply and I can think about things from a lot of different angles and like I can write about it and I can contextualize things and kind of talk about them really beautifully, but that traps me in my mind at the same time. It's it can be really hard for me to get out of that, of wanting to overanalyze and critique things in order to figure them out. Right. And it's a beautiful gift to be able to do that. And it's so great that we have these minds that can do that. And it's kind of like that overused quote, like the thinking that got us here won't get us to the next place. Right. Like the same mind that created this problem won't solve it. And so, in fact, our mind won't solve it at all for the most part. There's a space for becoming solution oriented, but oftentimes, like you said, we immediately go there and we bypass the actual emotional experience that we're having. And there's very little to learn. And when we're not able to be with the emotion of whatever's happening in our life, not only that, but like it's not like that emotion just goes away. We just kind of jam it down further and further. And you're talking about this midlife awakening or midlife crisis. A lot of that's that, in my opinion. It's just like, man, this person's just repressed and suppressed so much feeling and so much truth in their life for so many years until like literally it's up to their throat. And they can't help but just vomit it out into like, I'm done with this life, right? And then what do? They go and buy things, right? They might buy a car, they might do all the classic stuff that you hear about. They divorce their partner, and they think that if they change the external world, that all of a sudden their life will change, and it might enact a little change because they're taking action in a direction. But ultimately, what they're doing is that they're trying to wrestle with this idea that they've been so out of integrity and dishonest to themselves for so long, right? Because they've suppressed all this emotionality, because we don't learn how to feel and process emotions in our culture. It's just not a thing that we do, especially as men. And so then it comes out in all these sideways ways, right? And so, yes, going to the solution first, I would always be a little curious when I start to do that, like go right to Google to find an answer, or Reddit, or a podcast, or a program, or whatever like that, to figure out what's going on, or because it's that desire to not be with the tension of the moment. We don't want to be with tension in our lives, right? And emotions create a lot of tension. And so I'll tell a quick little story. So I was saying earlier in this podcast, like, I think we go through seasons of like, who am I? And seasons of feeling lost. And I was talking to you a little bit about before this, like, why am I giving up my place and getting in my car? Well, because I'm in one of those seasons, right? And one of my teachers, his name's Bill Plotkin. He's super great, does a lot of work with kind of what he calls soul initiation and really finding our soul's purpose on this planet. And he basically says, like, once you get to the end of a stage of development, when things are at the best, when you don't want to leave it, when you've kind of like mastered that stage, that's when it needs to be let go of, right? It's like at the apex of it, right? And so I'm not saying that I'm like super duper successful and whatever, but I've played the game. Okay, I can run a successful business. You know what I mean? I can make money. I can be out on my own. I can have a place in society. I can build followers online. I can play the game. I can do all that kind of stuff. And as soon as I hit that, it was like I lost complete interest in it. It was so interesting. It was like one day to the next. It's like I worked all this time on Instagram to grow a following, and then it like exploded to a decent size, and then it was like the next day I was done, right? And so that put me in like a big tailspin, because it was like, man, what do I do now? Like, you know, like I thought I would be doing this men's work and this stuff for the rest of my life, and whatever, having these conversations and building a podcast and running retreats and all that kind of stuff, and all that's important, and I will continue to do it. But I know that there's another deeper layer. And so I was out with this organization with Bill Plotkin, and I was with some of his guides. We were out in Joshua Tree in California. Really beautiful desert landscape for those who haven't been there. And I did this 5-day retreat, and we were just camping out there. And a lot of the work that they do, you enact these wanders. So you just wander the land, and you actually have a conversation with whatever you want to call it: God, mystery, the land, the animals, anything, right? And you just allow yourself to be pulled by the muse. And I had to admit, like, that I'm lost. And like, I would not admit it to myself for months, for like 6-7 months. I was like, nope, I'm good. I'm just need to double down on what I'm doing. Like, I'm good. But I was living in this tension of misery. And I just like, fuck it. I said it out loud to the desert. Like, it's giving me goosebumps just talking about it. I was just like, I'm lost. Like, I'm lost. Like, I'm lost. And like, I had to just fucking feel it, like let it permeate me, and like admit it to somebody, if not myself, to like God or whatever. Like, fuck, I don't know what I'm doing. And man, like it just opened this floodgate of emotions for me. And then I came back to the kind of our little camp after a few hours, and we were sharing about our experience. And I told the people, I said, for the rest of our time together, I want you to call me lost. Like, I want to embody this so deeply that like, I don't even have my name anymore. I'm just lost. So everybody called me lost for the rest of the time. Right. And so it sounds, it's kind of contrived and a little silly, but like for me, it was quite deep at that moment, because it was like, I had such tension with being with the emotional experience of not knowing, and like what it was, not allowing myself to feel that, not allowing myself to accept that deep emotional experience, that like, how could I work so hard on building something and work so hard on myself only to get to the stage where I don't know what the fuck I'm doing? And then just allowing myself to admit that, because I wouldn't admit it, I was just making messes everywhere in my life. I was an asshole to my partner, you know what I mean? I was like bristly and grumpy, and I didn't want to do anything, and I was just distracting myself and eating weed gummies and like just doing everything I could not to like be with the tension of where I was at, until I finally admitted it. And then it's like, oh, now I can surrender, because now I'm being honest with myself. Now whatever wants to transpire next in my life can actually invite me into it, and I can see it. I can be available for it, because I'm not trying to be some old iteration of myself anymore who knows what the fuck's going on. So this is what, like, I'm in that process right now, which is why I feel like I can speak to it quite articulately, because I've been through these seasons before. And what I'm recognizing more and more, like I recorded a podcast last week, and it was just a solo conversation of me talking about this, what I call a descent to soul, where it's like, I'm going through this transition period where it's like, wow, I've built this life and now I have to let it all go, right? Not doesn't mean I literally let it go, but I have to let go of my attachment to it, that this is my life, and then see what else wants to transpire. And I shared that podcast pretty vulnerably and pretty openly, just off the cuff. And I had dozens and dozens of people reaching out to me and being like, dude, there's something you shared in here that resonated with me so deeply, because we all are trying to figure it out. And when we think we got to figure it out, we hold on to what we have figured out with, and that never lets us evolve to the next stage. Right? We get stuck in this. It's our egos. We get stuck in who we're supposed to be in the world. And I think, to your point, social media and polarization and all that kind of stuff has just amplified that to the extreme. Right? Everyone talks about having a personal brand these days and being like a creator and stuff, like, oh, you have to have a personal brand. And it's like, is my life a brand? Is like my personality a brand in which I sell now? And then now that I have a personal brand, like, how do I diverge when I'm not that brand anymore? What happens to my life and my business if it's so intricately tied to me and my personality and who I am? And I'm a shifting and evolving human being. I'm not static. And the only way that I can really get virality and build a following is by being absolutely non-nuanced, is being inflammatory and being all, and you don't have to do that, of course, but that's kind of the game that we're showing, like, oh, if you want this is what it costs. Right? And that stunts us. And so, yeah, I know I went tangential there again, but I would just say, like, it comes back to feeling what's really true, feeling the truth of your emotions, allowing yourself to access them, right? And then from there, there's a wellspring of wisdom and knowledge underneath all those emotions that will really guide you in the next place, which may or may not take you to your purpose, or a deeper purpose, perhaps.
It might just take you to the next stage of what your purpose is, or the next thing that you need to, the next room
whatever
you need to go in, or the next door you need to move through, the next experience of pain, or the next like high-low, like you said, like it could be, and I'm not going to say what could be for you, but it could be you have to enter into the thing, learn the thing, get to the peak of the thing, and then let go of that thing to move into the next thing.
I think that's it, man. I think that's, that's beautiful. I think you could surmise the whole life journey into that. Like, get called into the thing, master the thing, and then let go of all attachment to the thing and see what else wants to come next. That's a pretty cool way to live.
Yeah. But it's also for our, like, because as you were talking about personal brand, I was just really thinking, like, fuck, this personal brand stuff is basically going, hey, ego, let me take you out of my mind and let me put you into reality as a fixed entity for you to directly feed on the world. And then I'm locked into you. even more so than when you're just internal to me, because now the world sees you. And if you change, you die. It's even harder for me to allow that to happen. It's like personal brand is like basically personal ego in the world.
Yeah. And also like, I think on a subconscious level, or maybe not subconsciously for many people, it happened to me. Everything in your life becomes some sort of piece of content. Like whether you actually record it or not, or whether you have to, it can be marketed and talked about and fit into a 90-second reel or a post or whatever. It's like, even if you don't do that, some part of my consciousness is always like thinking about doing that, which is kind of fucked up.
It's fucking ridiculous.
You know what I mean? It's kind of fucked up. Like, talk about presence. Are you really, like, how much of your life is becoming kind of calculated in order to fit into this? We're very much losing the semblance between like a personality that's created and who we really are. And talk about finding yourself. Like, man, I'll share a little bit more, and I got about 10 minutes left. I went on this 28-day backcountry survival trip like 2 years ago. I'm actually just about to go on another trip with these guys. And I talk about this a lot because it was probably one of the most significant periods of my life. Southern Utah, if anybody knows that area, it's like beautiful red rock desert, goes up to high alpine, like really diverse landscape. No tents, no lights, no sleeping bag, no nothing, no technology, no lighter, nothing. Completely primitive. All I had basically was a few layers of clothes, a small medical kit, a knife, and a couple water bottles. And we went 28 days out on the land. And obviously I had no phone and no social media and stuff. And I'm probably the longest amount of time that I've been away from any device ever. Like since I was a child, really. No computers, nothing. And my nervous system, and you and I have done a bunch of work around the nervous system, and it's a pretty hot topic these days in the social landscape about regulating a nervous system. I didn't do any practice out there. I didn't do any breath work. I didn't do any meditation. I didn't do anything. I didn't think about social media or any of that crap. And my nervous system got to such a regulated place. Like I had never felt more calm in my entire life. Now, I wasn't drinking any stimulants. There's no coffee. There's no nothing, right? But I wasn't getting triggered. I had no idea what the political situation was anywhere in the world. I didn't know anything. I had access to nothing. All I had was nature and a small tribe of about 7 people. And I came back from that trip, and my nervous system stayed there at that level of slowness and that level of just integration for probably 2 weeks. And then slowly life leaks back in, and all the stimulants leak back in, and the personal brand and all that kind of stuff. But it was so significant that like I track my I have an Oura ring I'm pointing to right here, and it tracks my heart rate. And my heart rate dropped 10 beats per minute so when I got home, my resting heart rate was like 37 beats per minute, which is fucking like, that's like very low. That's like what Tour de France athletes resting heart rate is. And it wasn't because I exercised a bunch out there. I mean, I did a lot of hiking, but slowly over time, it pumped back up to about 50, right? And it just showed me that like, man, the way that it's not even about like the things that are obvious stimulants in our lives, but like just even thinking about the social media all the time, just thinking about all this kind of stuff, just thinking about all the polarization, all the scrolling reels, the constant and never ending flow of information and light and sound that's just being blasted on our consciousness all the time. And I'm sure you've sat Vipassana, so you understand what this is like in those 10 days too. You get a similar kind of thing. You leave there and you're like, whoa, talk about awareness, right? Talk about being able to figure out what you want in your life and your purpose and all that kind of stuff. So it's like people that want to find themselves, I guess is what I'm getting at. It will require turning all this stuff off for a while. And if you can get away, I'm fortunate I was able to take a month off and go do that. Most people can't. But man, most of the answers that you're looking for, or most of the listening that's required in order to be led by life requires listening. And that requires turning down the volume on everything else. And so I just wanted to throw that in there I don't know why it just kind of came up as we were talking about a lot of this stuff around building personal brands and stuff and kind of making our life content. It's like, man, when you let all of that go, who you really are is already like kind of there beginning, you know, and it's like I said, back to this piece around suppression and repression. It's just, you have to make space for it to arise. And that requires kind of shutting out everything else from time to time. And in our world, man, the prolific mental illness and just the mental breakdowns that everybody's going through and the amounts of stress, I can directly correlate it to just the amount of information and socials and news and 24-hour cycles of everything. Like, it is not good. It is not good for us, and it's not good for anybody that wants to live a life of purpose and a life of meaning. You have to be able to turn away from that stuff because you're just getting programmed 24 hours a day.
And it's just shutting us off from the whispers that would come through naturally. Like, you know, when you're out in the desert for 28 days.
No, because you got someone yelling at you. How can you hear a whisper? You know what I mean?
Because you've cleared so much space and it's debris. No, it's okay. Everything's like settled down. So the little voice can come through and you're like, oh shit, I didn't hear that before. But you can't hear it in this normal world where we're on social media, we're creating 5 bits of content a day, we got to record podcasts every other day, like we got videos to edit and all these things. We can't do that because we've been bombarded with information. But when we allow that information to subside and be silenced and we go somewhere where that information isn't, we allow so much of who we are and what's underneath all that to kind of like come through the fertile ground of the space and presence.
Yeah, and it's not even, yeah, exactly. And it's not just the noise itself is enough, but like also I think people underestimate how deeply they're being programmed by what they're, like your thoughts are, 90% of them aren't even your own anymore. I mean, I don't know if they ever were, but like it's just like, man, if I'm really honest with myself and I begin to like kind of pick this stuff apart, it's like, where did I pick up that belief or that thought or that idea? And it's like something that I might have just felt like I was just scrolling through it or it just came up on my feed and it's like so immemorable, but on some subconscious level, you hit with that stuff enough times over months and years, and now it's decades. We're starting to talk about, you know, Instagram's been around for a decade. You have a decade of something that's like programming you. It has an impact. Like it has an impact. Of course you can't find yourself. Everybody else is trying to tell you who you're supposed to be. And who you should be and what you should believe. How the fuck could you ever find out who you are in that terrain? Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful place to pause and stop. We need to listen to something to really ponder
thanks
there.
For letting me go off for an hour or so, man.
No, man, it's fucking beautiful. It's beautiful. Man. I love when the episode just dives and weaves and so forth. But I'm sure the listeners will find out where they can hear more from Evan. They can hear more of Evan's strong opinions and ideas and nuanced points as well.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I always say strong opinions held loosely. So, you know, if you listen to something 6 months from now, I might be having an entirely different view on everything that I've shared. And so hold everything I said here lightly, but take your life seriously. I'll say that too, because it is serious. So you can find more about me at Evan Meyer. That's EvanMeyer.co, not .com, .co. So evanmeyer.co. And then I'm on social medias everywhere. They're all at I am Evan Meyer. So YouTube is where I'm mostly hanging out now. I have an Instagram. I don't really post much there anymore, to be honest. But YouTube's where I'm really starting to grow and make more content. And then I've got a podcast. I'll add that in there too. Podcast is called Undomesticate. And you can find it everywhere that you listen to podcasts.
Beautiful. All those links are in the show notes below. And I say a big thank you to Evan for today's weaving conversation. And yeah, man, such a pleasure to catch up and talk and get into these pieces around just finding ourselves. We would have known we were going to talk about finding yourself, but that's where we got to. And it was a wonderful, wonderful and beautiful conversation.
Yeah, brother. Thanks so much for having me here. And it's just great to be here with you and see you.
Thank you. And listeners, if you know someone who's struggling to find themselves, and we all do, it might be you, it might be a friend, share this episode with them to give them some insight and maybe help them create some space in their life and go for a long walk in the park or in the forest or something and just give themselves some space to listen and see what's underneath all that instead of just scrolling on their phones constantly. But I'll let everyone run off with their days and say big thank you to Evan, and ciao, ciao.
I want to say a big thank you for listening. You know, it's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. You know, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them. You know, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you know, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.